How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Adrock and I'm back with another WoW Legion dungeon video, this time covering the Eye of Ashara. Eye of Ashara is a bit unorthodox in the Legion dungeon videos because it's a little more open-ended in how you want to tackle the middle bosses. Most players tend to stick to one specific route that we'll cover in this guide. It's a good thing for timestamps, yeah? Trash is labeled to the bosses to make things easier. Things to note before we proceed though, the dungeon itself gets progressively hostile as you down the bosses. This includes violent winds. After the second boss is killed, winds will push players in random directions, which will occur every 90 seconds for 10 seconds. And lightning strikes. After the third boss is downed, a small whirlpool will start appearing under players. After 3 seconds, they do medium to heavy damage to everyone within 4 yards. Also, don't get too pissed off if the players in your group can't stop pulling neutral mobs. Though a grand majority can be avoided through either smart player positioning, shit happens. Also, this might be one of the longer guides as many of the mobs will have noteworthy abilities that players should watch out for. Speaking of which, if you're going into any dungeon, always observe basic dungeon knowledge and etiquette. Don't stand in the fire. Can't heal stupid. Dispel your mates. Just be cool like that. Interrupt when you can, when it's appropriate. You do not want to waste an interrupt on all these dungeons and all these random trash mobs. And if we're not talking about it, don't worry too much about it. Now that all the formalities are out of the way, let's get on to the Warlord Parjish trash pack. First off, you're going to find Hate Coil Warriors. They do have a rush that's similar to a Rogue Sprint that lasts for 5 seconds, but they also have Coral Slash, which will bleed targets in a front cone in front of them. Tanks, you should face these guys away from the group to avoid more than one person being bled. And they will enrage at 50%. Hate Coil Stormweavers, do not waste your interrupts on Lightning Blast if you can help it. They have far more important abilities you need to stop. Mainly being Arc Lightning. It'll target a random target and do heavy damage to that initial target and chain to everyone else. It is interruptible. They also cast Storm, a 12-second channel centered directly onto the Stormweaver. They take heavy damage to all targets within 10 yards. It is interruptible. If Storm goes off, tanks should try and pull the enemies away. Everyone else, just get out. Just get out. Hate Coil Crushers will cast Mighty Slam, which is nothing to write home about, but afterwards they will cast Thundering Stomp. It's a medium damage and a knockdown. It is interruptible though. Hate Coil Oracles will cast Rejuvenating Waters, which is a healing pool, interrupt it as often as you can. And Hate Coil Wranglers will often give you the most annoyance in this part of the dungeon. They hook nets, which will root targets for 6 seconds, and they will cast Lightning Prod, which damages the entire party and also tags Wandering Shellbacks to join the fight. If it's not your hunter, it's these guys. It is uninterruptible, which makes them a high priority target, so you should kill them as fast as possible. Wandering Shellbacks are neutral turtles that have a crunching bite, which reduces the armor by 20%, and it stacks. So tanks and healers should expect some dangerous moments when you add this to every other mob you're fighting at the same time. Spiked Carapace will reduce damage by 50% and will damage anyone that hits it with spells or abilities. To avoid taking that extra damage, just do not cast directly onto the turtle. Either focus on the target, AoE, auto attack it, or stun it to get around the Spiked Carapace. And now for our first boss of Eye of Ashara is Warlord Parjish. It's a really low movement fight with a steady stream of adds, so don't rest. When movement is needed, it's to avoid near fatal damage. Throughout the fight, Parjish will call reinforcements, which will summon a Hate Coil Crest Rider or a Hate Coil Shellbreaker, which will periodically just show up and be annoying. Crest Riders will cast Restoration, which will heal allies over 6 seconds. It is interruptible, and make sure you do, because if not, it'll heal Parjish for a large amount. Make the Crest Rider a kill priority. Parjish will throw spears at random non-tank players, set it off for 9 seconds. If you have a personal mitigator, just use that and just give the healer a little bit of breathing room. Crashing Wave will send Parjish into a straight line, happens roughly every 30 seconds. It'll deal heavy damage to everyone in its path. Tank, make sure you face Parjish away from the group when this happens. Everyone else should sidestep. After 2 to 3 waves of reinforcements, Parjish will target random players with Impaling Spear. After 5 seconds, the spear is thrown at the target's location. You can find out where it's going by looking at the arrow from Parjish. It'll hit the first target it meets, whether it's a player or a mob, so party members should stay out of that little alleyway. Targeted players can hide behind the mobs, the Crest Riders and Shellbreakers, avoiding all that damage, and the spear will hit the mob in the process, which is great because it'll knock him back, pin him out, and then bleed him out real fast. It'll do the same thing to you, though, if you get hit. So healers prioritize the player that is hit. If not, they're most likely going to die. At 30%, Parjish enrages. If you're doing Warlord Parjish on Heroic or Mythic, the Call Reinforcement will actually summon both adds, so make sure you kill the Crest Rider and leave the Shellbreaker for the Impaling Spear. Shellbreakers do become motivated after casting successful Bellowing Roars, which will make them hit harder for 30 seconds, and it does stack. Parjish's Crashing Wave will also leave a quicksand trail behind him, slowing everyone inside it, and they will take damage while they're inside it. Tanks, make sure you reposition Parjeesh after crashing wave so no one really wants to stand in the quicksand or has to. Now all the trash in this section leads up to Lady Hate Coil. 2 of the 4 Hate Coil Arcanists must be killed in order to make Lady Hate Coil vulnerable. If not, you won't be able to attack her and you have to go back and kill them again. The Hate Coil Arcanist will cast Aqua Spout, which after 3 seconds, players caught in the little telegraph are knocked up if they're standing inside it. It does medium damage, but it is also interruptible. They will also cast Arcane Rebound, which deals medium damage, and does chain to other players if they're within 5 yards of the current target, also interruptible. As well as Polymorph Fish. Polymorphs you for 8 seconds. You can dispel it, you can interrupt it, and you can hate it. Hate Coil Wavebinders, on the other hand, have a bubble shield, which will absorb and increases their hastes. When it is depleted and exhausted, the caster itself is stunned and they'll take double damage from feedback for 6 seconds. Dispelling bubble shield will not cause the feedback, so really just let the absorb shield happen, blast through it, and burn them down. They will also call waters, which summon water elementals, no big deal. Animated Storms, on the other hand, will have Water Spout, which will damage and knock back a random player. So these guys are a high priority target if they show up. Often you might run into a Grit Slime Snail. It has Abrasive Slime, which is a heavy cone attack in the front. So tanks, face it away, face it away. And now for our next boss in the Eye of Ashara, Lady Hate Coil. Before engaging Lady Hate Coil, clear the area of the sea salt droplets. When they die, they'll explode, hitting everyone within 5 yards of them and slowing them. Lady Hate Coil herself is a single target fight, but will require a constant stream of movement, which is like a dance, and spatial awareness, so droplets will make this really difficult. The main mechanic combo you're going to watch out for involves Static Nova, Focus Lightning, and the sandbars surrounding her. Static Nova, after 4 seconds, will deal heavy damage and stun all players standing in the water. To avoid all the damage and stun, stand on the sandbars, but refrain from camping on the sandbars for prolonged periods of time because Focus Lightning will happen after 15 seconds after Static Nova. It'll hit all players, and if you're standing on a sandbar, it will destroy it. Players within 5 yards of each other will also take additional damage, so that combo damage can be lethal if you're not, aware. So spread out throughout the fight. The best way to deal with this combo is, like I said, dance between the water and sandbar. So you see Lightning Nova, get on the sandbar. See Focus Lightning, stand off. You don't have to go really far away, just dance, 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 like 5 yards. Just do not stand on the shore at the edges of the fight. Players standing on the shore or that leave the area are targeted with Crackling Thunder that will stay on them until they re-enter the area. This deals heavy damage and ramps up, and it's your fault if you die from this. Curse of the Witch will hit a random player and with each cast, so it's not for sure how many it'll happen. I've seen 1 to 3. It does nothing for 12 seconds, no damage or whatever, anything else like that, but if it's dispelled or it finishes its countdown, it'll knock back all players in a cone in front of the afflicted player. Again, doing no damage, just a knockback. Doesn't sound that big a deal, but when you combine that with, the prior attacks, it hurts a lot. Players afflicted should keep the countdown in mind and face away from the rest of the group at the end. This can knock players off sandbars, stun them, hit them, combo them, get into the edge, it gets crazy. Luckily, it will also destroy the sea salt droplets if you're dumb enough to leave them around. If you're on Mythic or Heroic, Monsoon also happens. It's a small little monsoon that slowly follows the closest player, and if they're caught, will knock them up. But if it reaches the sandbar, it will destroy it, and is destroyed in turn. So if you get hit with Monsoon, kite the Monsoon away from the group to the outer edges of the area, and if you can, just to an outer sandbar you're probably not going to stand on, or that annoying hunter is standing on. Welcome to the trash leading up to Serpentrix. Most of the trash is really close to him, so pulling should be done very carefully to avoid starting the fight. I say this because I've had multiple times where someone's AoE happy, dot happy, or barrage happy, and will pull Serpentrix while you're trying to clear all the trash out. So avoid it if possible. Just keep pulling them. If you have a group like that, pull them away farther. Trash here makes life even more difficult, and the Cove Seagulls are Satan incarnate. You're going to end up finding Sea Spray Crabs, which are little groups. They'll have Jagged Claw, which are medium range dots that do stack, so it can get crazy real fast if you're not careful, especially during the main boss fight. Makarana Hard Shells, which have Clobbering Claws. It'll deal damage that's evenly split among 5 yards, so anyone stuck in there will take split damage. The damage will still happen, though, if it's parried, dodge, or misses, so you take extra damage if you're actually hit with a claw. Armor Shell will happen, and it's an Absorb Shield. If depleted, it'll shatter and deal heavy party damage. Luckily, it is interruptible. You'll also find Makarana Stiltwalkers, which will spray sand in 30-yard cone range. It's very heavy damage, so everyone, including the tank, can sidestep this. They'll also cast Sandstorm, which does no damage, but anyone caught within it has a reduced chance to hit. It is dispellable. Stormwake Hydras they seem dangerous, they kind of are dangerous, but they also aren't. They have Roiling Storm, which is a bouncing counterattack, sidestep it. Chaotic Tempest, which is a lightning bounce in random spots near players, sidestep it. And Tail Whip. It does heavy damage and knocks back anyone behind the Stormwake Hydra, so DPS attack from the sides. Lastly, we have Satan Incarnate, the Cove Seagulls. They're evil bastards. Evil, horrible, conniving bastards. I don't have enough expletives and enough languages for anything that describes them. They do medium damage and will disorient players constantly with Blinding Peck for 2 seconds. Doesn't seem like much, but in this next boss fight, you're going to really hate it. Kill everyone you find. I mean, it's not mandatory, but the Blood Gods will thank you. There's a special place in Helheim for these soulless creatures. Up next is the boss Serpentrix himself. It's a two-phase fight that splits between single and multiple spread out targets. So healers, you must be especially conscious of where you're positioning to cover as much space as possible. DPS, if you have ways of mitigating damage during phase 2 and self-healing, rely on these as much as possible in case you're out of range or just not paying attention. During phase 2, DPS must focus on the adds before going back to Serpentrix, or else it's going to suck. So phase 1, Serpentrix will cast Poison Spit, which is a 2-second cast. It'll launch out Poison Globs, and when they hit the ground, it'll leave pool of player locations. They do medium damage, but they are affected by the Violent Winds debuff that I did mention at the beginning of the video, which will make the projectiles run faster or slower depending on where they're being launched and the wind direction. Toxic Wound will hit one player every 25 seconds. It'll target a non-tank player for 6 seconds. Every second throughout 6 seconds, you'll drop a Toxic Puddle that follows a player dealing medium damage. So stack and stutter step them around together to lessen the problem, because they will stay out throughout the fight. At phase 2, which happens at 66% and 33%, Serpentrix submerges and reappears at a different location. 2 new heads now appear at 2 random spots. DPS, focus these first. Mostly you're going to run into the Blazing Hydra spawn, which will do a continuous Blazing Nova, doing party-wide damage. It is interruptible, but just go through it and burn them fast before going back to the main boss. Serpentrix himself will still cast Toxic Wound and Poison Spit, but if no one's in melee range, he will start rampaging, which makes faster Poison Spits. So tank, chase him down ASAP to avoid this. After the adds are killed, the fight reverts back to essentially phase 1. If you're fighting Serpentrix on Heroic or Mythic, during phase 2, a purple Arcane Hydra will spawn in place of one of the Blazing Hydra spawns. They will cast Arcane Blast, which is light damage to one random target, but the afflicted target gets 1 charge of Arcane Charge per blast. It is interruptible, but every time you get a stack of Arcane Charge, you take 50% increased damage from Arcane Blast. So technically, the Arcane Hydra does do less damage to the raid, so focus the Blazing Hydras first. So, this could change in Mythic Plus. Really, it's just pick your poison, kill them both fast as you can, get back to Serpentrix. Up next, we have all the trash leading up to King Deepbeard. You can avoid most of the trash through careful movement, but several packs of Murlocs and Slaves are nearly unavoidable. So for the Salt Scale Skulkers and the Salt Scale Lurkers, they all have Tearing Bites, which will increase damage taken for 6 seconds, and it will stack. So use AoE stuns and cleave them as fast as possible to avoid getting shredded. Your tank will thank you. Bitterbrine Slaves will have 3 different types of Toxin. Lethargic Toxin, which will 10% slow, it stacks. Numbing Toxin, 10% haste reduction, stacks. Seabrine Toxin, it's a dot, it stacks. All the toxins are dispellable, but do the same thing with them that you did to the Murlocs and you're fine. Do not pull the Murlocs and Slaves at the same time. It sounds very tempting, but that stack on top of all the toxins become catastrophic and it's a wipe. I've never seen it successfully done, or very rarely has it happened. It's just not worth the headache. You'll also run into Scrog Wave Crushers. They'll have a Rising Fury, which every 18 seconds will stun and knock down the entire party. It'll grant the Scrog a stack of Rising Fury, making every next cast even stronger, kill them fast. Scrog Tide Stompers will cast Massive Quake. Every 20 seconds, water spots will explode after 3 seconds. They'll deal heavy damage, and the whole thing happens over the course of 7.5 seconds. Now we're moving on to King Deepbeard himself. It's a single target fight with medium movement requirements and party-wide burst damage, so healers, this is where you're going to shine. He'll cast Quake at full energy. It does medium damage to targets and anyone within 5 yards, which will combo together for big damage if you're not careful. It'll also leave cracked earth spots at the point of impact. Please spread out, like I just said, to avoid the combo damage, but 4 seconds later, after every Quake, you get Aftershock. This will happen at every cracked location. It'll damage everyone within 5 yards, so do not stick around if you're hit with a Quake for the Aftershock. It's not worth it, it's going to hurt. King Deepbeard will also cast Call of the Seas, roughly around 30 seconds and every 30 seconds-ish. He'll summon moving pools of water that do light damage on their own, but multiple pools can get really hairy real quick. Doesn't seem like much, but also these Aftershocks and Call of the Seas really combo into the next ability, Gaseous Bubbles. Happens roughly every 33 seconds. It'll hit 2 random non-tank players. Tanks will never get the bubbles. It'll absorb a large amount of damage, which seems all good and dandy, but if it's not depleted in 20 seconds, will deal massive damage to the whole party. You must purposely take damage to deplete the bubble. Use Aftershock patches and use the pools to do this. Also, watch out for Ground Slam. It's a 2.5 second cast time, a large zone that's centered on the tank, so tank, you need to move. It'll deal massive damage to anyone caught in that zone. Damage bypasses any mitigation, so don't even bother trying to stay and soak it. It's not worth it. King D-Period will Frenzy at 30%, so tank and healers should save big cooldowns and heals for this as D-Period's melee attacks get real hard real fast. For Heroic and Mythic, the bubble damage now is proportional to the absorb left on the bubble, meaning it can be 0 if you pop the bubble, but if you haven't done anything to it to lessen the absorb shield, it can be potentially raid wiping. On Mythic specifically, Aftershock patches do not disappear and stick around for the whole fight. Every patch will trigger Aftershock. Doesn't seem like it's that big a deal. I mean, it sounds like it, but it really isn't, as the fight area is rather large, so the party as a whole should just be conscious of how much space they're taking up when they're moving. And lastly, we have the last trash pack with the Wrath of Ashara leading up to it. You must kill these Nagas before fighting the Wrath. If you try to get into the Naga casters before you fight the Wrath, like by randomly on a boss, you will start taking a lot of damage, so leave them alone until the very end, like right now. While this is happening, tidal waves will rotate counterclockwise around everything, which deals significant damage to anyone in its way. You can run around it, don't worry about it, just be aware. All these casters have 3 abilities. Honestly, the third one and the second one I gotta worry about. The second one being the Arcane Bomb. All these Naga casters will cast massive arcane bombs that slowly fall on a ranged player. On touchdown, they'll deal heavy damage and stun anyone within 10 yards for 6 seconds. It is dispellable, but here's the caveat. When you do dispel it, it does not disappear. It actually stays on the spot it was dispelled at. Ritualist Lisha has Aqua Spout. Channeler Varese has Polymorph Fish. Yay. Binder Ashioi has Magic Binding, and Mystic Save has Storm. And finally, we move on to the Wrath of Ashara itself. The Wrath itself is a single target fight, but is very movement heavy and requires spatial awareness, so you have to be looking around you. You can move around most of this damage and actually avoid quite a bit of it if you're fast enough. The Wrath has a generous hitbox as well, so melee shouldn't feel too concerned to stick around on top of the boss. You should attack from the sides though to make your healer's life easier for you. After all, dead DPS is 0 DPS. Do not step in the pool the Wrath is in, as it will deal some damage to you but also knock you back, making you run into other things and just combos and it becomes crazy. Spells to watch out for are Tidal Wave. It circles around the Wrath, damaging anyone who passes through it. They'll also cast Mystic Tornado, which will spawn on a random player. It does move erratically and randomly, so you can't really predict it, and it'll deal medium damage and knock you up if it hits you. The waves and tornadoes do not despawn, and will keep spawning throughout the fight, so keep in mind. He'll also cast Arcane Bomb, so we already talked about it, no big deal. New ability though is Heaving Sands, a party-wide damage every time Wrath hits the tank. Even if the tank dodges it, the party damage will still happen, even to the tank. So healers, you should be constantly engaged in this encounter, but seem to focus on dodging stuff. Massive Deluge is a large zone on top of the tank, and it'll deal heavy damage and knockback. It'll trigger Raging Storms. At 10% health, Wrath will cast the Cry of Wrath. This will actually involve all the elemental hazards you've seen so far. Violent winds will now push players every few seconds, lightning strikes happen more often, and there will now be more tidal waves. So keep that in mind, it's kind of like his version of an Enraged Heroic. Now on Mythic and Heroic, he'll also cast Crushing Depth. It'll target random non-tank players with a huge zone, and after 6 seconds will deal large damage. Luckily, you can split the damage the more players are in the zone. Tanks, you should not be in this zone unless absolutely necessary. The rest of the group can, suck up the damage and make deal for it. Just stack up, let the healer drop AoE heal, move on with their life. Anyone hit by Tidal Waves or Mystic Tornadoes in this part will also get stacking debuffs. The Tidal Wave slows, the Mystic Tornado will also increase the damage from waves, tornadoes, arcane bombs, and lightning strikes, so they're very scary. Luckily, like I said, you can move around all these things and avoid most of this damage if you're not careful. If you are careful. And that pretty much concludes the Eye of Ashara dungeon run. Thanks for sticking around this crazy just mess of a dungeon. It's fun, but it's still crazy, right? Make sure you have all of your, critiques and wishes and comments and put them on anywhere you find this video. I'll always try to look for them and add them and improve future videos. So, until then, just, check out QueueTimes.com. Check me out at AdRockDraws on Twitter and at twitch.tv/AdRockDraws and youtube.com/QueueTimes. So, peace.